Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate all of you being here sincerely and the topic of this hearing. Prior to Congress, I ran a think tank for 25 years, and this is one of the areas that the last 2 or 3 years that I was there, we were focused on. And looking at the material, and particularly the release preparation program, one of the things that I didn't see was a concerted effort to help inmates achieve either a high school diploma or a vocational degree or an associate's degree that would really, it'd do two things, Mr. Martin. It would prepare people to enter the workforce, but it also gives them that ceremony. I mean, it's, I really appreciate what the chairman has said about, you know, you don't want to be soft on crime, but at the same time, when someone has paid their debt, that debt is paid. And they ought to be able to reenter society. Ms. Roseberry, I was looking at the information in the Colson Task Force report, and the thing that I didn't see in it was recommendations for a program to help inmates achieve a high school diploma or another degree. And when you look at who's in prison, again, back to what Mr. Martin said, it's disproportionately poor people regardless of color. And it's disproportionately people who are high school dropouts. One of the reports shows that 68% of state inmates are high school dropouts. And that's regardless of race, gender. This is something, I'm more focused on finding solutions. And I think the solution is before they go in the prison door, and then unfortunately, we got to focus on how we get them out the prison door. And looking at the Colson Task Force, one of the things that I was looking for, it's one of the things that we've suggested in Alabama to this point to no avail, was to utilize online learning programs. I mean, there's excellent opportunities for people to achieve a high school diploma, to get an associate or vocational degree, networking with businesses who are prepared to hire these people when they come out. We're at a point in our economy right now where there is competition for workers, particularly workers with certain skills. But also, and going back to the Colson Task Force, I had the great privilege to know Chuck Colson, a godly, wonderful man, to integrate into that these faith-based groups that can help prepare them for reentry. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes. First, I'd like to say with respect to your comment about the front end, you're absolutely right. If we're talking about, for example, ban the box, creating the presumption that African-American men have more connections with the criminal justice system, perhaps the solution is to stop over-policing those communities and incarcerating those individuals to begin with. But the Colson Task Force did look at the fact that the Bureau of Prison staff were spread thin by virtue of overcrowding, and we made the recommendation that because we found waiting lists, for example, for GEDs to be years long, and the opportunity to be eligible for programs to be put on the back end of the serving of a sentence, and also for lifers, there was no eligibility. We made the recommendation that the Bureau of Prisons incentivize participation in these programs, of course, after reallocating resources so that those programs could be provided to everyone. Mm-hmm. Also, in our recommendation that programming be individualized, be evidence-based, data-driven, and individualized, you would see that folks who needed educational programming would have an opportunity to get it by virtue of it having been identified for them.
Let me address that. There was a report from the Alliance for Excellent Education that reported on underserved students. They're disproportionately poor, regardless of race. There's over 1,200 of those schools. In New York, there were 199 of them. These are schools that have very high dropout rates. And again, going back to the dropout rate, and then the information from the Bureau of Prisons, it shows that inmates who leave prison who do not have a high school diploma, their recidivism rate is 60.4%. So when I talk about on the front end, this is outside of the purview of the Bureau of Prisons, obviously. It's all about how do we put more emphasis on helping particularly young African-American males stay in school. That's a pathway to a better future. But for those who are incarcerated, I really believe we ought to look at a way to incentivize, if I may, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Horowitz, you were talking about there's no incentive for them to enter the program, to incentivize by looking at these inmates who have not committed violent felonies, who are going to be paroled, that if they achieve a high school diploma, they're eligible for an earlier release. If they achieve an associate or vocational degree, that creates the incentive, Mr. Martin. It gives them a goal. It gives them a vision for a future that, frankly, I don't think exists right now in our prisons. Would you like to comment on that, or anybody?
I'd just like to reiterate that the task force did recommend incentivizing these programs, even for those who are serving life, and suggested that the reward for them could be better confinement conditions, et cetera. And for others who have a release date, that the release date would be moved back with good time.
Just briefly, two things. One, it was a correctional counselor who said to me I should go to college after I got my GED.
You were a high school dropout.
Yes. And so I earned that GED, and while he was looking at those test scores, said to me, you should go to college. So as important as the degree was, you're right, there was a bit of a moment where another human being in a position of authority who was seeing hundreds of people that day saw something in me that I might not have even seen in myself in that moment. So there is the value of that and everything else that comes from education. There's also the piece about the conditions of confinement. The fact of the matter is that facilities that have more programs do better with respect to safety of correction officers. Why? Because the people who are serving time, they want to take advantage of those opportunities. And also, the folks who may not yet be college ready or even ready to get their GEDs have something to look forward to and to look up to. I can't tell you how many people I helped to actually get their own GED after being in college while I was incarcerated.
Mr. Chairman, there's a report, and I'm sure Mr. Martin and Ms. Roseberry, maybe everyone on the panel is familiar with, from Pew, the collateral cost, incarceration's effect on economic mobility. It's the very thing that Mr. Martin's been talking about. There's also an article that young black men without a high school diploma are more likely to be found in a cell than in a workplace. And I just want to emphasize that I think we want to make sure that our society is safe, that law enforcement's able to do its job, but at the same time, there's a reality that we've got to recognize that most of these people are going to reenter society, and I don't think we're doing enough to prepare them for that. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. And the chair now recognizes the gentleman.